Hey everybody, thanks for coming out tonight to the World Campus Technology Club. Tonight we have a guest speaking about election security through process, Ryan Clark. So take it away, Ryan.
Yes. Hi, Ray. Thank you. And I will share my screen here as fun as we always do in these fun Zoom times. So you guys can see what I'm going to be speaking about tonight is election security, but coming from cybersecurity, we rarely ever approach the process. Every time everybody wants to talk about election security, we talk about technology, firewalls, voting machines, etc. But everybody forgets the path that gets us there and why that stuff is required. So I'll jump in here. This is, of course, the obligatory piece about me. Did the soldier part, went and worked at the NSA, and then I did a few things in there. This is kind of cybering before cyber was a thing, if you will. And I've even taught there some old fun stuff. The history of the internet one was probably my favorite. Then just walked up as I got out and did a bunch of the actual IT stuff and seeing how the world made sense when it wasn't about security, and used all of those skills, went back into county government as the principal security analyst. And that's where a lot of this information will come from in my experience here, and what then translated me into a senior advisor for cybersecurity, and blessing working around Ray for the last 7 months. So explicitly in public sector. So some of the topics I want to cover tonight is elections technology and where cybersecurity fits in. I have audience participation in this one because I truly do want you guys to keep up participation. And at this point, ask me anything what you think of when it comes to cybersecurity and elections. Literally unmute yourselves, jump in. You guys had any thought about elections and cybersecurity? What are the first things that come to mind?
Black box, Diebold security systems that have notorious flaws.
Okay.
That documentary about how electronic voting machines have security flaws.
Yep. All right. So I feel like the responses are all kind of be in that lane, and that's part of what I wanted to, or I want to dispel today, and highlight why we actually use all of these technologies, what the value of them is, where we got to, where we are now, what's broken, and how do we fix them. And so I'll highlight all of these things and then come down here to the bottom, because none of it matters, absolutely none of it, without a secure process. So you've probably heard a lot of these things lately. Yay, fun stuff. Mail ballots are fraud, in-person voting is unfair, we don't have poll sites, etc. The whatever is stealing our election, China, Russia, Korea, call it whatever flavor of the day. Vote totals are all that count, etc. Because we have to know the night of the ballot, or the night of the election, what it was. But I take a different approach. We got here, and my opinion, we're going to blame 1968 for this, because that Democratic primary in 1968 was an absolute mess. And this stupid machine is what started everything. This machine is called a mimeograph. And a fun story, in 1972, the Democratic Party in Iowa decided that they wanted to print every single ballot for every single Democratic primary voter in Iowa. They did the math and they realized that they would have to start printing the ballots for the upcoming election like 9 months in advance. So guess how Iowa became the quote unquote first in the nation primary for both Republicans and Democrats? Right here, 1972. But the curse is that it digitized elections and it forced technology into these processes. And that's where it all started. And come into our fun timeline of every way that we have digitized elections. In the 70s, like I said, we started there. We were just trying to print all the ballots as quickly and efficiently as we can. 1980s, they started making better printing with thermal printing and imaging. States invested in the 90s in a ton of back-end computer stuff, started digitizing all the voter records, and that's where you start seeing some consolidation. And this is also where the state technologies that we are frustrated about today across 8,000 different jurisdictions start to break apart. You start seeing certain states go in certain directions, other states go in other. And in the 2000s, that's where it starts to scream. So after that craziness in 2000 with the Florida votes, you saw a huge investment in 2001, 2002 into voting machines. Well, how did we know those voting machines were secure? Who created the software? How did we implement them? What were the reasons for doing it? How did we audit them afterwards, verifying the integrity of the vote? All of these things that we hear about just disregarded. So the curse is that after the 2002 Georgia election, which still goes down as the most ridiculous technology failure of every election that I can think of, we started to see things, 60 Minutes, 48 Hours. They had some wonderful exposés on the security flaws in voting machines around 2007, 2008. And that's where a lot of our prejudice comes from those areas. 2010s, same thing. We were coming out of the recession, so it was a little hard to dump money into state coffers and into local coffers explicitly. So some of the states started centralizing the data. And when the states that centralized the data early on really are the ones that are driving the best practices right now. I will say that I am absolutely biased. I come from Colorado, a county government there, about 40 minutes or south of Denver. And the capacity for them to perform elections through process and securing every single step of the way, the centralization of all of that data dramatically helps that. The curse was we also saw new threats to elections. Just to highlight that, we can all sit here and know what they are, but we'll talk about that later. 2020 elections, it's a whole new beast. So coronavirus, right? It's putting us all at home. It's making sure that we dramatically increase mail-by-ballots, elderly and the infirm and disabled peoples. Like, how are they supposed to vote, right? One of the curses is Braille ballots. That there are tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Braille ballots printed every single year. How does a blind person understand where to go, how to get that ballot? There's all kinds of election security staff underneath there. One of the things they're trying to push out is a mobile application to help a lot of those disabled people. In the 2018 election, it actually was allowed in West Virginia as a test run for the federal election. And I know that sounds scary that we talk about mobile app and elections, et cetera, but the way they did it seemed to be more of a POC. It worked out pretty well. Keep an eye on it as we go forward. And the fun part is instantaneous result expectations are still there, and they are still part of what breaks us. So Bruce Schneier, old kind of elections guy from the 70s and 80s, gave a great quote, one I like to continually highlight over and over again. And I leave it up here just because I'm going to read off the board fantastically. But elections serve two purposes. The first, of course, is to pick the winner. The second one, which is where everything breaks, is to convince the loser that they actually lost. So there's two ways that we do that. Or there's two requirements to doing that, apologies. The integrity of our elections data and the public trust in it. So I know I'm speaking to a cybersecurity crowd. So the CIA triad, integrity, is right there in the middle. This is the key essential piece of that triad for elections. If we can't validate that and we can't translate that integrity to the public so that the public believes it, we have lost every capacity of voting as a democracy. And that's where cybersecurity comes in. So highlighting the risks, where are all of our risks related to the integrity and the public trust, right? Ambiguity in the results. How do we know when things are a little off sometimes? It's not entirely clear. We don't have a perfect answer from certain officials. It just goes to degrade public trust. Some of the other pieces, misinformation, risk, and vulnerabilities, right? Certain firewalls have vulnerabilities, but if they're never exposed to the internet, they never matter. Certain OSs, right? Windows XP still lives in a ton of environments. I know of environments where Windows 93, the old DOS base, is still running in IoT environments. The entire airline's logistics platform is back-ended by COBOL of all things, because every time they have tried to uplift it from the 1950s, they have never been able to get past those things and shut systems down. So risks and vulnerabilities are completely different, and the public doesn't understand that. And our job as security professionals is to help translate that. Get to that in a bit. We do have minimum security personnel affecting elections office. That is something that is changing dramatically in 2020. Tons of governments are starting to engage with this. Auditing, we've never had audit procedures until 4, 6, 8 years ago. And even now they're still evolving. Every day we introduce new processes, new requirements. And every time we do any of the above, it presents a new target for an adversary or for somebody trying to engage in destroying that election's integrity to attack. Keeping going. Communication in all of this is the absolute 100% foremost necessity. If we can't speak correctly, if we can't engage with the public in the right way, if we can't provide the information in a way that they can turn into public trust or knowing that their elections officials are doing the right thing, then we're breaking the process from day one. So I won't lie, I like to communicate by memes. So how did this email go on? And then we're gonna need more emails. So of course, hey, let's bring it back, why not? So election stakeholders. When we think of election stakeholders, we always think of voters. We always think of that poll watcher, that person that we can see and touch and know, but we never end up extending that out. And these are the key stakeholders at the top levels of every election. All of the elections are run by local municipalities, counties explicitly. They engage in every election within their municipality, and they engage in every election within the state. The state then monitors all of that, as you can see by the Secretary of the State and the Secretary of State's CISO. We want to make sure that all of those stakeholders are engaged, communicated with, and have the right information disseminated to them on time and effectively in a way that they can ingest and action on. That is a key piece of information. If people can't take the information in and translate it into something that they need to do, then the information is either of no value or isn't being communicated the right way. All of these people are instrumental in making sure that that information is given to the right people, is provided on time, and is required for the actual purposes that that person is performing, right? I'm not going to give the security information that I'm translating over secured networks to the DHS to the the volunteer standing at the door of the elections building on the day of an election. That's not something he needs to know or she needs to know. So that's the entire piece of all of these. We keep track of their roles. We keep track of the risks involved when they screw up. Yeah, I gotta watch my tongue there. So for incident response, I like to highlight this one just because it's a unique and common thing that's absolutely required across all parts of elections, across every election, across every state. It is one of those common principles for every IT and security staff. So we think of who cares, right? We'll pull out our stakeholders. We know them. We know all of those people care. But the other piece to this is we never think about who else is involved. So I'll skip over the laundry list, but some of the fun ones in there I like to highlight. Journalists, right? Why would we care about journalists? We'll get to that. National Guard, that's another fun one. Department of Transportation, like who would have thought of that? Emergency management offices, really? Who cares about them? County lawyers, why would they matter? Social media platforms, really? Like we think of them as crap for election security. Why would they be in engagement with all of this? Well, the reason that we do all of these things is because every single person on this has a role to play in those two key principles, the integrity of the data and the public trust in that integrity. And spare me the the nice long laundry list of stuff. I'm usually not as wordy in presentations, but I know this is going to be disseminated out. So I wanted to provide a paper trail and a nice long list of reference for everybody. I'll apologize professionally in advance. The why, though, for each one of these, I'll try to highlight some of the unique ones that we never really think about, right? The regional weather tracking, right? Why would we care that their weather expectations are coming in correctly? Why are they then passing to OEM? Why do we care about the Department of Transportation? Cool. Why do we care about local law enforcement engagement, right? Think about it like this. You have poll sites on the day of an election that never see a high volume of traffic. All of a sudden, on a single day, they're getting thousands, if not over 10,000 vehicles rolling through a single spot in a low traffic, usually area. And that creates a massive cluster of chaos. Without the law enforcement engagement, getting there ahead of time, knowing what they're going to anticipate, and knowing their requirements, all of which never engage with technology, that is a key requirement for making sure that the elections are getting off securely. Social media platforms, I know we bust on them, but one of the things they actually do is take action on the things that we tell them. The FBI and DHS have backends, same with the National Guard, into these social media platforms for incident response, and they are incredibly responsive for these things. You have a person out there impersonating a candidate, get them off there. You have a person out there, or a candidate out there who isn't verified, a lot of those, or anything else, make sure they get verified. You have, if you've seen on Twitter, calm myself down and say that I like to be on Twitter quite often. It's kind of my social media platform of fun. They explicitly have representative or candidate of this district in this place. That is a direct request from DHS for their process to change. This is a fun one. Emergency management offices, they have addendums for everything. Their elections addendums are, I think the county I worked in was something like 340 pages long or something like that for elections only. They have shelves and shelves of them. They know what they're doing, but they're the ones that will engage with state and everybody else that requires emergency action. So I like to run through this. This is a fun incident that came up at our regional, our Colorado elections tabletop. And this was one I created from it. So as you can see, we have a 0 to 100% chance of 0 to 2 feet of snowfall. So very accurate weather casting, right? Still broken. So then you see on Twitter, fun, giant snowstorm's gonna ruin that elections day. That then gets a foothold. Where does it move? To Facebook. And all of our moms and grandmas start talking about this and how they're gonna make sure that we get out to vote on elections day. It makes its way through all of the senior centers. They have no idea if they're gonna be able to vote. Turns into something bad. Then you see on Reddit, right? Oh, that person's gonna lose the election because of Mother Nature. Dear God, that cannot happen. That is our person's, that is our person, and how dare that happen? There's something's got to change for that. See how the escalation is building. And then finally, I don't know, this video has proved that Spirit Agnes Ghost is controlling the weather. Who knows? It's YouTube. So for that, it's all based around an inaccurate weather report. This is how the problem of all of those different stakeholders not being identified translates into elections insecurity. When you get down to the end, everybody is freaking out and you are losing that public trust. You're unable to translate that into a way that people can know that their vote is going to be secured, which is the core principle of what we drive for. Cybersecurity, security is longer than cyber. That is your focus. So of course, I like the meme response. Again, I like the one at the top left, just because, you know, snowstorm's gonna hit. Coming from Colorado, this was a serious concern, if only because it almost did it in 2016. We got maybe 4 or 5 inches, and it almost got really bad. And to date, to my knowledge, there still is no coordinated state plan for a major disaster of snow on the elections day, which is a huge issue, right? The right one I like to highlight too, because it's talking about dispatch. You're communicating to law enforcement. If you have issues the day of, and then of course, Bill Murray is always fun. So incident response. When we actually do have an incident like this, this is the step, or these are the steps that we take, right? Social media is going to pick up on it. They're going to move on. They're going to contact the DoD people that they have and say, hey, these are the issues that we're seeing. This is the intelligence we're gathering off of it. These are the people, these are the areas that are generating this type of traffic. What can we do? What more action do you need from us? Like I said, as much crap as we give them, they are responsive on the back end when it comes to the federal authorities. So that's why we focus on the federal authorities for county government to push up information. Then we just keep walking down. The DoD is going to contact the Secretary of State's office. DHS is going to work with offices of emergency management, most likely at the state, as the giant brain center of all of the incident response for that state for the day. They're going to disseminate everything out as best as they can. They're going to make sure that they engage with local journalists. This is the key piece of the Office of Emergency Management that a lot of people forget, the public affairs and public liaison persons that make sure that the information that's reaching the people that are going to provide the information to the public is accurate, is informative, and it makes sure it gets straight to the point of what voters need to do that day. That information gets pushed out news sources. It gets everywhere as quickly as it can. They set up these contacts years, if not tens or decades in advance to make sure that that information is translated incorrectly. County officials reported out, election staff drafts updated procedures, and election staff engage with municipalities and stakeholders for everything else. Municipalities, right? All of the cities, all of our local townspeople and city councils and school boards, all of these are also elections that happen on all of those days. We know them as a voter, but we rarely think of them in conjunction with the elections at large. When we say elections, we're just often referencing federal elections or something else that we see with a grandiose background to it, right? We talk about federal elections, president, senators, but we don't think about the local school boards, the local county commissioners, the city council for that little township that has 8,000 people in it. That's more what we should be talking about. So process decisions. We made through this process, this incident response process, but this came from somewhere. We think of this and go, oh yeah, that makes sense. But what happened before we ever did this? When did it not make sense? So for elections officials, how did they decide that this was it? Was it perfect before? No. Is it perfect now? Probably not. But maybe someone did a review of it, maybe after each election, maybe after the last election. How are we actually going to know that? Pretty sure nobody did it and someone broke it on purpose. Most likely one of us. So let's do this. Racket. Elections tabletop exercises. These are, in my personal experience, the most effective way to understand the three things that all elections process reviews have to do. We have to understand the codependencies that come between the various underlying processes of the elections. We highlight the gaps that are found in between, and we define all of our emerging stakeholders, right? We never would have thought of FireEye 10 years ago as a stakeholder in our election security. We never would have thought of Cisco firewalls being a mandated standardized configuration and controls for election security 25 years ago. It just wasn't a thing. Nobody had barcodes on ballots, and nobody did access controls, and nobody had remote voter registration access. All of these things have been emerging stakeholders in how we define elections processes. That's why you always hear the phrase election security is never done. It's consistently a moving target. It's because of these pieces right here. We get to the bottom of them by engaging in tabletop exercises and simply breaking the process in between all of those. That's where cybersecurity professionals come into play. Our brains are warped to go nihilistic and break everything on purpose. If you're red teaming, you know how you're breaking into something, you know what the vulnerabilities are, you know where to exploit them. If you're blue teaming on the other side, you know every single way that that person is going to break you as best you can, and you build around it. Everything in between is all of the other elections people and IT people that don't really have a stake in it. They're there for all of the information that they can give you because they're the experts. Listen to them, drive them to the right answers. We plan. I didn't highlight that as well in this as I would have liked, and I'll say it more and more. So the risks that come with that, right? We talked about them earlier, but we haven't really touched on a key piece of this. We've talked about process, we've talked about everything. The one piece of the puzzle that's always been missing is the technology behind everything, right? We never engaged with the technology and we fixed an entire incident. So where does this then translate in? We have all of our security. So we secure both our technology and our processes. We need to make sure that we know how to do both, or that we know how to secure the technology. That's what we're in school for. That's what we're trained for. That's what we're constantly driving at. The issues presented earlier, what does cybersecurity and elections have in common? Where do they intersect? And we mentioned like the different pieces of technology. We never branched out into other aspects. And this is where the process and the technology start to intertwine, and how we can see where the process defines the technology, not the other way around. So the first thing I like to highlight, computers elections officials use, right? But we don't focus on the computers always. We always look at how they use them. If they're going to be out at a poll site and they're only going to be connecting to a local network, should they be allowed to access other networks? Probably not. That's a security control we can put in. If they're going to only be used by 2 or 3 people, how do we limit the access down to those 2 or 3 people and get rid of everything else? Those are security controls we can take. And all of those are driven by how we use them, not the actual technology underlying them. Another piece of this puzzle is the elections requirements for all of our IT services. We know what we're going to translate. They need a network to do their job. They need computers to access stuff. They need Wi-Fi, and they need printers, and they need USBs and all of these other things. We know how to deliver all of those from an IT department, from a security department, but how do the volunteers actually use them? If we have an IT incident response, how do the volunteers know who to call? Do they all call the elections office? What about a place like Houston that has a county full of 4.5 million people? Do they all call the elections office? Those are the issues, those are the questions that we define in the gaps in our tabletops. Simply highlighting where something is a little squirrely and makes your eye twitch and go, wait, no, there's something else there. Those are the questions that we want to ask. Every time we engage with the technology, the after questions, the and, is the part that we always miss in cybersecurity. Testing the security of the elections website, we would all think that we would want to do that, right? But if there is something that happens that's bad for that website, how during our tests do we define what those people will do to fix it? Who do they call? How do they act? What should they be concerned about? What are their expectations if A, B, or C happens, right? If a website goes down or they lose connectivity right in front of a voter, how does that look? And how do they then explain to the voter that that is something that they are aware of and that they plan and practice for? They have training, they have statements that they can give the voter. All of that is process just around the technology. So here are some live actual elections issues that I personally addressed in 2018. So this is a personal experience. I'm going to drive off of that. Voter registration data, that was fun. Lots and lots of phishing. Oh, that is an everyday thing. And the curse is for government space, you communicate with the public a lot. So you have to leave those filters down very, very low, much lower than most security professionals would like. Creates a whole new avenue for targeting. And that's another reason why a lot of local governments are targeted for phishing and targeted for ransomware. There's another fun one. A candidate gave very false information over social media about where to vote, how to vote, what was happening with votes, etc. Got a lot of people worked up. And the last one that I got to see in person was a voter came in, they swore they didn't vote by mail. And yet when they pulled up their voter registration and tracking, it showed that their vote by mail had already been tabulated in the backend system and reported it as complete. You never would have thought of things like this, but this is how we address them. Yes, processes everywhere. This is what actually happened with these. And again, it's wordy. I'm sorry if you're reading. I'm going to keep explaining. The voter registration on the dark web. Oh no, the voter registration data is actually public in every single state. It's a federal regulation and requirement. They have to publish their voter rolls for receipt at a federal level. The voter registration data, all that public data, all somebody did was they scrubbed every single state. They put it all into a giant Excel sheet database, for lack of a better way to put it. And someone then put it on the dark web. I can't even write that word or say that word without wanting to cringe. I hate the word dark web. And the media said it was from hacking because, of course, all of it was public data. All somebody did was through a service to all of the other adversaries out there, put all of the data into a single source and then sell it. Another fun piece that happened, the website crashed. Our website crashed at 7:03, 3 minutes after the end of the elections results were in. Our website crashed. Well, it sounds horrible. Oh no, I got attacked. Yeah, I got attacked by our constituents. So a web server that usually takes in 100, 200 hits per hour over the course of the entire elections process leading up till 7 o'clock that night or that Tuesday night received 112,000 plus requests in under 3 minutes. And it destroyed that server. When we went and looked, it looked like a vendor had put a throttle on the threads for that box. So it was using a 100th of its capacity. Changed that, came back up, absolutely fine. The fun piece of the puzzle was the reason it got so many wasn't a federal election. It wasn't anything else. It was a local school board election. Drove 40,000 people to go and check our website within seconds after the 7 o'clock number hit. That fun piece at the bottom, the semi-truck accident on the highway, we go back to those other stakeholders, right? The Department of Transportation, the local law enforcement, our regional counterparts in other counties. A semi-truck had an accident on the highway about 10 miles north of our county. The other county officials communicated that down. The sheriff's office coordinated. The Department of Transportation started putting up signs, right? Those big old banners that say this interstate is out. This interstate is out, or 18 minutes to this exit, or 12 minutes to this, or accident up ahead. Please exit this lane. Everybody moved in coordination and in sync to make sure that all of the information to their departments was communicated and given to people, the voters, to make sure that all of them could still get to the site. We always hear about if you're in line when the night ends or at 7 o'clock, whatever it is, that time that the vote is done. If you're in line, you can stay in line and continue on. But what happens if you're not in line? What happens to that person who got off at 5:30, tried to drive down from a half hour away and ended up stuck on the highway for an hour and a half and didn't get their vote in simply because a truck had an accident on there? Those are the scenarios that elections officials are constantly trying to drive out. And through security, we can help coordinate and make sure that all of that communication is both secure and completed on time and potentially in an even sensitive environment. And that is our job as security professionals, right? How did the highway patrol communicate back to the sheriff's offices? They used secure VoIP connections that we've set up. How does the DOT know which places to affect? They have direct lines and VPNs into local county resources so that we can communicate over secure channels back up to the DOT. That's the way cybersecurity impacts these processes. All right, continuing on the other elections ones, the lots and lots of phishing, that was always fun. But we made sure that users were always trained ahead of time. We always have to do our annual security training. It's always fun, right? But highlighting the explicit things for election security staff, I made sure that I did in-person phishing training for the election staff and our finance staff so that they were absolutely certain that they could get to all of this. Let's see. Candidate gave false information. That candidate was a local city council candidate for one of the municipalities, the 5 municipalities that resided in my county. She got a phone call and she got a bit of a tongue lashing from our county clerk, and all of the information was changed immediately once she was informed of what was actually happening and trusted the county clerk rather than the 2 random people that told her on Twitter. Of course, accounts created that day, all that fun stuff. And then the final one, the voters swore that they didn't vote by mail, but how did we know how to fix that, right? One of the de-escalation procedures at a polling site is to make sure that the voter is given a provisional ballot. And that allows them to vote, kind of. It's provisional, hence the word. I bet you guys never thought you'd get a whole rundown of how the elections process actually occurs tonight. But the ballot was thrown out during the secondary audit because they voted by mail. It was verified. It was known. So more recent example, that 2020 Iowa Caucus App for the Democratic Party, right? We always remember that. That had an egregious failure. It was absolutely horrible. What kind of problems did we have? Did we answer any of these? Nope. But why QA it when the customers will do it for you? These were the failures. Number 1, it was a catastrophic integrity disaster. I will pound the table over and over and over again. And integrity is the sole thing that matters for elections. Required training was never done. They changed the processes the day of. The training provided never included security. How many people saw people post online that day of, hey, I have this ballot and I have this app. What do I do? And you can see their pins, you can see their account IDs, everything in those pictures. Nobody had any idea. These are local people just trying to help out their election, and they failed them horribly. Another piece of that puzzle, journalists weren't given a heads up, so every single thing that hit the media was horribly represented. How do we fix that, right? So we focus a little on the technology, but the technology break occurred because of these other things. The technology was horrible, but the reason the technology was horrible was because none of the process steps that lead into using that technology were assessed or were actually trained onto the users, right? So encouraging gazing across department lines during the project rollout. How many of us have delivered projects and you get this one person from marketing that says, oh, this isn't right. And then you get the PMO that says, oh, this isn't right. And you're trying to drive the requirements for security over and over again. The data security and the volunteer training, that's a big one. Make sure that they know how to secure their stuff as well as you, as best as you can, right? There are blackout periods. This is another feature of cybersecurity in defining the integrity, right? We make sure that our changes are minimal or non-existent during windows of high priority elections or high priority elections traffic. We would consistently have 30-day blackouts before every election day, and we would extend those blackouts until all of the counting was done. We made sure the networks were never changed, or they were only changed for critical patches, et cetera. And everything was communicated to the elections in case they had to speak to it or public affairs had to speak to it, any of them. Incident response procedures, same thing. All of that stuff is what you're doing as a cybersecurity professional before anybody ever votes. So I want to come back to this. I mentioned Colorado earlier, and there has been a very large focus on mail-in ballots this election, just COVID, all of the other stuff. I wanted to highlight how Colorado does it. Colorado has been the standard for the better part of 5-6 years now. After the 2014 and then summarily the 2016 election, Colorado got pegged as the premier election security in the country. We do what I term ballot by mail. I hate mail-in ballots. Ballot by mail is where every registered every registered voter gets a ballot in the mail. That ballot comes with a 80-page printout of every ballot initiative or every proposition initiative that's on there. Every candidate gets to put stuff in there. Every local place gets to put stuff in there. Anything that you see on that ballot on the right, one of those people had a say in there. So you want to go into there and find what the United States Patriot Party put up for their candidate and his expose. You can find it in there. They give all of that to you with your mail-in or with your ballot by the mail. That ballot comes with a unique barcode. It is tied back to you. I actually grabbed the one that I filled out in 2016. This is quite literally Merlin Klotz. That was the guy that I worked with, Douglas County, Colorado. That's where I'm coming from. So I will give myself away in that way. So some of the new requirements, right? We had new voting options, new paper audit trail requirements, softwares and technology. So what does that actually mean when we say that? So voting options, right? You had to extend out ballot drop boxes. What are the new risks in those? The new emerging stuff, define the risks. Post office deliveries. All of a sudden, the post office is going to be delivering 4 to 10 times more ballots, more paper to that elections staff, that elections building, wherever they're warehousing the data. That is communicated with and from the post office to make sure that they change their routes in the same way that those sheriff's office and law enforcement will change the high traffic priority routes. It's the same thing, making sure that all of those ballots are there on time, secure, and getting getting tabulated correctly and at a point where the people can trust whatever is coming out of the elections department. Key piece of this that I actually didn't put in this presentation, Colorado allows for all of the mail-in voting and every ballot that is delivered to a drop-off box, to the elections office, et cetera, they will count them as they come in. That is a very good thing to have, in my personal opinion. It means that about 70 to 80% of the night of, when at 7 o'clock time rolls around for your elections, they have tabulated somewhere around 75 to 80% of all of the votes at that point in time. And they can start giving out some very accurate preliminary results. So then we move to paper audit trails. We always talk about this, but as we introduced technology in those 2000s and 2010s, we never left paper audit trails forward. That was one of the core concerns back in 2014 when everybody started to freak out about voting machines. And we had that giant expose, and some people kept breaking them at DEF CON. The voting village came up. All of that was in response to 2014, but Colorado was ahead of that game, right? The curse is that you now need more elections volunteers because you're opening a lot more ballots. That is a painful, painstaking process. You are moving down to software audits. So now you need the voting machine audits. You need the vote tracking audits. You have tabulation reporting. You make sure that all of the ballots that are actually generated and written by our third-party vendors are going out to users and constituents. I keep saying users, constituents correctly, accurately. Anything in there, well, as tonight is a very good example, will end up trending on social media platforms as some nefarious thing that state elections officials then have to pull back. They have to do as much as they can in public engagement to make sure that that problem is defined to the people as not a problem. Technology changes. This is another fun one, right? So we introduced all those new technologies, but now we're introducing way more in a way different, or in a much different way. So I wanted to highlight a few of the voting processes that are very integral to why Colorado has secure voting. And when I say secure voting, I mean the public trust portion. The public trust is, again, making sure that when that voter puts their ballot in a ballot box, when they put it onto a screen, when they put it into an elections official's hands, whatever way that they do it, they make sure that their ballot is counted. And I always like to highlight that the people that don't trust that The people in the elections office, they're their neighbors. They're the ones that are literally living in the same community with them. They're the ones tabulating all of these. The people that have raised their neighbors, that have raised their friends, that used to teach at their high schools, are the ones sitting in those local elections offices, volunteering year after year after year. I believe that this should be inherently trusted, but in this voting process, they verify with the person how it's trusted. The biggest piece is that poll worker always asks them, have you reviewed your ballot to make sure that each vote is what you've selected? That is the explicit phrase that they request in Colorado for our area, and made sure that every voter was asked that before they put their ballot into a ballot box on the day of. Coming back down, voting collection, right? We move on from here. All those people voted, but then like, how does that actually get back to an elections building? They verify all the seals, right? That's the thing that we do. We make sure that everything for technology is sealed and siphoned off to where it can't be used, right? Think of every USB port that we disabled via COM port GPO rule. Well, like, how do you know that they weren't actually used, and what can you do if you can't do that? Well, you just put a little sticker tape over it that is one of those trusted physical security tapes, and you move on, because that's our job. It's just to secure it as best we can. Elections officials, they'll open it. Everything is two-party control. Everything always is two-party control. Whenever a ballot is touched, somebody else is watching that person touch that ballot. Gets brought back, it gets into this feeder system. It will make sure that those ballots are tracked, tabulated, and this is the piece where it reports in that your ballot is now into the system and is being tabulated. You have poll watchers of both. This is the part of me that screams at my TV, that screams at my computer, that people don't trust this because of a partisan issue. Every ballot that they oversee has somebody of one of the two major political parties standing over their shoulder in tandem. Those people are connected at the hip the entire time they are in an elections office. They're the ones that say, yes, all of these things are accurate. That person sitting in front of us is performing their job correctly. Something comes up, they might go, no, put that one off to the side. We'll get somebody to take a look at it, right? This is where you start moving into the signatures and everything else. I'm not going to cover that, but votes then are then collected, right? Those ballots are moved physically into the tabulation area, which is air gapped. And I will say air gapped. That is not negotiable. It is not an internet connected device. Anybody who says that any of their tabulation devices are connected to the internet needs to fix it yesterday. That is cybersecurity as well. Highlighting that all of that stuff needs to be segregated from the world is the requirement. It is on us as cybersecurity professionals to translate that into actionable tasks that our election staff can take, our IT staffs can take, and any county across can standardize into their processes. You have rural counties that have no resources. How do you take a big county like Denver County and take their processes and drive it out to this little county called Kiowa that has 10,000 people in it and nothing but farms? Those are the answers that we come up with as security professionals. So moving on, other processes. We never think about process, and I will drive this home as often as I can. Every single one of these processes has engaged me and has required an answer of me as a security professional. I cannot stress that enough. I was engaged in every single one of these. There were more. I just ran out of space. And like I said, I don't like to make it wordy. This is bad enough. Help desk response metrics. That's a fun one. How do you know how to change next year? Well, you figure out how many help desk response incidents you had to do. Well, this printer went down. This USB cord was broken. This voting machine screen was cracked or died. All of those things are simple and stupid, but to a voter looking in from the outside, being completely ignorant of the steps that we need to take and all of the planning we've done before that, they need the right answers. And those are the answers that we put into the poll workers and make sure that they can translate that back to a voter and keep that public trust. Candidate training and expectations. That's a fun one a lot of people don't think of. The candidates are actually trained, right? Because we're not always talking about senators, representatives. We're talking about local city council officials. We're talking about the head of a township, mayor of a city of 6,000 people. When their votes are going to be 372 to 310, they need trained. And driven expectations that they can then use the night of, so that they don't then turn around and turn into that candidate that was tossing out nonsense on Twitter, that they can then turn around and know how to communicate back to the election staff, and everything continues to flow smoothly for both the candidate and everything else, right? HISN, that's our communication path up to FBI, DHS. Air gap network audits. We make sure every January I'd go in and I'd make sure our sites were still air gapped, all of our computers were segregated, and all of our network monitoring and our different group GPOs were organized correctly for everything in the elections building. That was a cybersecurity audit required of me for our elections that had nothing to do with an actual election. So securing technology, I try to tie it back into cybersecurity as best I can beyond speaking about it. So when we got new requirement changes, those technology pieces are embedded in them. Those are the ones that we drive in. We always talk about there's 8,000 plus different elections jurisdictions. So there's 8,000 plus different ways that an election is performed, which is true, but those decisions are the differences, not our actions in response to them. So you have a voter registration website. What are the things that we do to secure websites, right? We provide allow lists, we set up 2FA. What are the things that we do for databases? We make sure that we audit every transaction that goes in or out. What are the things that we do when we need to blank databases? We go in, we audit, we make sure that those are correctly identified, a correct hash is put to them, and that hash is then validated against something at the state that has been audited. Uptime for monitoring for critical security and critical alert response. That's another piece of the puzzle. We always talk about 5 nines for networks and how it's not possible, but what if the state said you had to have 100% uptime for all of the camera monitoring? That's something that we have to take very seriously. I come back to this slide's a fairly big dated, but I wanted to highlight the new pieces of the puzzle that we've spent the better part of 8 months trying to answer. Personnel, volunteers, vendors, what new things are going to be required of them this 2020? The training that we're pushing out, how do we then translate that for poll workers, for elections officials, right? How many people are going to be standing in front of a poll worker this year screaming that their ballot doesn't count or something is wrong, and that poll worker has to answer that effectively to both de-escalate the situation and provide that voter a trust and confidence in the integrity of what we are trying to provide. Any new tech for 2020? I mentioned that mobile app out in West Virginia. What new things have we done? Fun thing too, when we introduced a ton more paper ballots, a lot of people forget that that actually is heavy. And certain places don't have anything more than 70-year-old volunteers, and that's hard for them to do. So that's a small piece of the puzzle that we never really think about, but election staff have to constantly think about. And my question to you is, are you satisfied with any of the answers you could provide for these questions? And to me, if the answer is no, then understand that election security is never done. And you have to keep integrating cybersecurity into not just the technology, but you have to engage, you have to take your information and expertise and push it into every process that the elections require to go off successfully and accurately. And until that's done, election security is always a moving target. And I believe I am done.
Awesome. Do we have any questions? Anybody?
I talk a lot, I promise. Don't hesitate.
Definitely a lot to think about.
Thanks for that. I don't try to give the answers. I simply try to provide an entirely different perspective to what security means to elections.
Last call. Any questions? I know it's one of those things where you get a lot of information and you have to process it for a while.
So I'll end on one note that I think kind of encapsulates everything. We talk about voting machines as being broken. They can be hacked. But think about the risk involved. How does a person have to actually break that? They would have to go into a local site. They would have to touch the voting machine computer after their voter registration has been verified. They'd have to do some really weird shenanigans in the middle of a room full of people for voting machines that somebody shouldn't be doing to a voting machine. And then they would have to know how to do all of those things. And then once they did that, all they would really be able to do is change any of the votes on that local machine. So you're affecting, in most places, 0.01% of any vote tally. It's always about the risk. That's why I highlight process over technology. So thank you for tonight, guys. If you have any other questions, please feel free. I didn't provide a how to get in touch with me slide, but I know Ray can disseminate some information. I'll make sure that's there.
Yeah, definitely. This was a great presentation. Thank you for talking with us. It's nice that it's happening right before the debate. So you can think about that while you're watching. And
Not planned.
and yeah, very topical. So thank you. Thank you everybody for coming out. And if you have any other questions for Ryan, you can just ask me and I will pass them along.
Thanks again, Ryan.
Yeah, thank you guys. I enjoyed the engagement.
Thanks everybody.